this is an animal cell. So this is what a single cell might look like. And some organisms are made of one cell, they're called unicellular. Some organisms are made of many cells, and they're called multicellular. So for example, bacteria are unicellular, and all animals and plants are multicellular. There are two main types of cells. There are prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells have all their DNA contained in a membrane inside the cell called the nucleus. So this is the nucleus of an animal cell on a model, and all the chromosomes are contained inside the nucleus. That makes it eukaryotic. Eukaryotic cells are also more complicated. They have lots more cellular organelles inside them. Eukaryotic organisms tend to be larger and more complicated than prokaryotic organisms, though there are some unicellular eukaryotic organisms. Prokaryotic organisms are more simple and they're usually smaller. They include things like bacteria and also the Anabina cyanobacteria that you looked at in lab. And so prokaryotic organisms don't have a nucleus. Instead, their chromosomes or the DNA is contained in just a loose in a region of the cell called the nucleoli, which we're going to talk about in the prokaryotic cell and virus chapter. Also, the last thing I want to mention before we start keying out organisms is different ways that some unicellular organisms move. Some unicellular organisms have little hairs all over the body called cilia. They use those to roll around with. Some unicellular organisms have a long hook-like tail they use to swim with called a flagella. And a pseudopod is basically an extension of the organism's body it uses to engulf food or to drag itself along. An amoeba is a classic example of a protist that has pseudopods. Also, we have slime mold. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it. Slime mold is a good example of a protist that has pseudopods it can use to creep forward and to engulf food. In this case, it's eating some oatmeal. So, I've already mentioned I'm not going to expect you to be able to memorize all the domains, all the kingdoms, and all the phylums. On your midterm exam, you are going to have the same dichotomous key that you had at the end of the second lab. And I'm going to give you that key. I'm going to give you 1 or 2, 3 specimens and have you key it out. I'm going to ask you what the domain or the kingdom or the phylum is. So I'm going to key out 1 or 2 of them with you as an example. So I want you to turn to the dichotomous key in the chapter lab 2, and I'll key out 1 of them with you. The first one I've chosen is our chicken. We'll start out at number 1. We have a 1A and a 1B. 1A says, organisms are mostly unicellular, made of one cell, with no true nucleus. So in other words, are prokaryotic. So is our chicken prokaryotic? No, we know it's not prokaryotic because it's large and fairly complicated. It's an animal, so it's got to be a eukaryote. So 1B is correct. It may be unicellular, multicellular, with a true nucleus enclosed in a nuclear envelope. So that tells us our chicken's in domain eukarya. It also directs us to number 3. So we'll go down to 3A. It says organisms may be unicellular, filamentous, or colonial, and many are microscopic. It's not unicellular, it's not filamentous, it's not colonial. So that's wrong. So we go down to 3B. Visible to the naked eye, made of many cells. Obviously, we can see our chicken is made of a lot of cells. So that's true. So let's go down to 5. 5A, organisms are immobile, usually fixed in one spot. Chickens are normally not immobile. So 5B is correct. It can move parts or its entire body. And that tells us it's in kingdom Animalia. Now keep in mind that some animals can move when they're at larvae form, like a sponge. They're only immobile when they're adults, so they're still considered to be animals for this key. So we'll go down to number 10. Okay, this asks us what kind of symmetry our chicken has. And our chicken obviously has bilateral symmetry. You can only cut it one way into 2 equal halves. So if the chicken's bilaterally symmetrical, it will send us down to number 13. And we have to decide if our chicken has a hydroskeleton, a calcareous skeleton, or a chitinous skeleton. Chicken obviously has a calcareous skeleton because it has a skeleton similar to what we have, made of calcium carbonate. So go down to 16. At the side of the chicken skeleton is an exoskeleton or endoskeleton. It has a skeleton inside its body just like us. Then we go over to the right. It tells us our chicken is in phylum Chordata. So what I'd like for you to do is be able to take this key here at the end of chapter 2. I want you to be able to key out any specimen that I may give you, even if you don't see it in class previously, and I want you to be able to tell me the domain, kingdom, or phylum.